The cabin looked like it had been thrown together by a drunk man with one eye closed, or at least that was what half the folks in Lewiston, Idaho whispered when they rode past Preston Keller's property in the autumn of 1883. The structure sat at the edge of town where the grasslands met the foothills of the Clearwater Mountains, its walls a patchwork of different woods, its roof an odd combination of sod and shingles, and its windows mismatched in size and placement. Preston had spent the entire summer building it, working from dawn until the light bled from the sky, and every nail he drove, every board he fitted, seemed to draw more ridicule from the neighboring ranchers and their families. Tessa Bradford heard the comments every time she went into town for supplies. She worked as a seamstress in a small shop on Main Street, her nimble fingers creating beautiful dresses and shirts for the growing population of Lewiston. At 22 years old, she had lived in Idaho for 3 years, having traveled west from Pennsylvania after her parents passed from fever. She rented a small room above the general store and kept mostly to herself, saving every penny she could in hopes of one day having a place of her own. The gossip about Preston Keller's cabin reached her ears constantly, and she found herself oddly defensive of a man she had never met. "That Keller boy has built himself a fool's castle," old Marcus Whitman said one afternoon as Tessa measured him for a new Sunday shirt. "Thing looks like it was designed by a committee of idiots. Different colored woods, windows that do not match, and I swear one wall looks thicker than the others." "Perhaps he had his reasons," Tessa said quietly, marking the fabric with chalk. Marcus snorted. "Reasons? The only reason is he does not know what he is doing. That cabin will not last one hard winter. Mark my words, girl. Come February, that place will be nothing but kindling." Tessa bit her tongue and continued her work. She had glimpsed Preston Keller a few times in town, a tall man of 25 with sun-darkened skin and dark blonde hair that curled at his collar. He had kind eyes the color of creek water in summer, and he always tipped his hat politely to everyone he passed, even those who openly mocked him. There was something about his quiet dignity that drew her attention, though she had never worked up the courage to speak to him. The mockery grew worse as autumn deepened, and the first cold winds swept down from the mountains. The Henderson family, who owned the largest ranch adjacent to Preston's small plot of land, took particular pleasure in ridiculing the cabin. James Henderson, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a mean streak, would ride past with his sons and shout comments loud enough for Preston to hear. "Better pray for a mild winter, Keller," James called out one October morning. "That shack of yours would not keep out a determined breeze, let alone a snowstorm." Preston, who had been chopping wood near the cabin, straightened and wiped his brow. "It will hold," he said calmly. "It will hold." James laughed, and his 3 sons joined in. "Boy, I have been ranching in these parts for 20 years. I know what a proper cabin looks like, and that is not it. You should have hired someone who knew what they were doing instead of trying to cobble it together yourself." "I know what I am doing," Preston replied, his voice still level but with an edge of steel beneath it. James shook his head and spurred his horse forward. "You will learn come winter. You will learn." Tessa heard about this exchange from Clara Mills, who ran the boarding house and collected gossip like some women collected china. Clara came into the shop that afternoon with alterations, her eyes bright with the thrill of fresh news. "That poor Keller man," Clara said, though her tone suggested she found the situation more entertaining than pitiable. "James Henderson was giving him what for this morning about that cabin. Everyone in town is taking bets on whether it will still be standing come spring." "That seems cruel," Tessa said, threading her needle with practiced ease. "Cruel? Honey, it is just the truth. That cabin is a mess. I saw it myself when I rode out to visit my sister last week. The walls are all different types of wood, like he just used whatever scraps he could find. And the foundation looks uneven. The whole thing tilts a bit to the east. Tessa focused on her stitching and said nothing more, but that night as she lay in her narrow bed above the general store, she found herself thinking about Preston Keller and his strange cabin. What if he did have reasons for building it the way he had? What if there was more to the story than anyone knew? November arrived with cold rain that turned the roads to mud and made everyone in Lewiston hurry between buildings with their collars turned up. Tessa was working late one evening, finishing a wedding dress for the banker's daughter, when she heard a knock at the shop door. She looked up in surprise, for it was well past closing time and dark outside. Through the window, she could see Preston Keller standing on the wooden sidewalk, his hat in his hands and rain dripping from his coat. Her heart gave an unexpected flutter as she set down her work and went to unlock the door. "Mr. Keller," she said, opening the door. "The shop is closed, but if you need something urgently, I can help you." He looked embarrassed, his ears reddening. "I apologize for the late hour, Miss Bradford. I was hoping you might have time to mend a shirt for me. The one I am wearing beneath this coat is the only decent one I have left, and I tore my spare this morning on a nail." "Of course," Tessa said, stepping aside. "Please come in out of the rain." Preston entered the shop, bringing with him the smell of wood smoke and fresh air. He was taller than she had realized, and up close she could see the fine lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the calluses on his hands from hard work. He pulled a shirt from the bag he carried, looking apologetic. "I am afraid it is a bad tear," he said. "Caught it on a nail that was sticking out, nearly ripped the whole side seam." Tessa took the shirt and examined it by lamplight. It was a serviceable work shirt, well worn but clean, and the tear was indeed substantial. "I can fix this," she said. "It will take me perhaps an hour if you can wait, or you can come back tomorrow." "I can wait, if it is not too much trouble," Preston said. "I do not mean to keep you from your evening." "I was working late anyway," Tessa replied, gesturing to the chair near the counter. "Please sit down. There is coffee on the stove if you would like some." "That would be kind, thank you." As Tessa prepared 2 cups of coffee, she felt acutely aware of his presence in the small shop. Most men who came in for fittings or alterations were uncomfortable, eager to finish their business and leave. Preston seemed content to wait quietly, looking around at the fabrics and dress forms with genuine interest. "You do fine work," he said, accepting the coffee cup she offered. "My mother used to sew. She could make anything beautiful with just needle and thread." "Used to?" Tessa asked gently, settling into her chair with his shirt. "She passed 5 years ago," Preston said. "Back in Missouri. My father went a year later. That is when I decided to come west, start fresh." "I am sorry for your losses," Tessa said, beginning to work on the torn seam. "I lost my parents 3 years ago. It is part of why I came to Idaho." They fell into conversation as easily as old friends, the awkwardness melting away as they shared their stories. Preston told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about learning carpentry from his father, about the dream of having his own place where he could build a life. Tessa spoke of Pennsylvania, of her mother's sewing business, of the loneliness that had followed her west, but also the hope for something new. "I have heard talk in town about your cabin," Tessa said carefully, not wanting to offend but curious. "People say it looks unusual." Preston smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and lighter. "They say a lot worse than that, Miss Bradford. They say it looks like it was built by a madman." "But you had reasons for building it the way you did," Tessa said. "It was not a question." He looked at her with surprise and something like gratitude. "I did," he said. My father taught me that different woods have different strengths. Oak is strong but rigid, pine is flexible, cedar resists rot. I used each wood where it would serve best, not where it would look prettiest. The thick wall faces north, where the worst winds come from. The thin wall faces south, to let in more warmth from the sun. The windows are different sizes because I placed them to catch light at different times of day, to make the most of the short winter daylight. Tessa listened, fascinated. And the roof? Sod over the sleeping area for insulation, shingles over the living area for better drainage. The whole design is meant to hold heat in winter and stay cool in summer. My father built a cabin like this once, in a bad winter in Illinois. Everyone laughed at him too, until that winter came and it was the warmest house for 50 miles. It sounds incredibly clever, Tessa said, her needle moving swiftly through the fabric. Why do you not explain this to people? Preston shrugged. I tried at first. But people hear what they want to hear. They see something different and assume it is wrong. I decided it was easier to let the cabin speak for itself when winter comes. That is a lonely way to live, Tessa observed. I suppose it is, Preston admitted. But I learned early that trying to convince people of something they are determined not to believe is like trying to rope the wind. They talked until Tessa finished mending the shirt. And then they talked some more, until the clock struck 9 and Preston jumped up in alarm. I've kept you far too late, he said. Please forgive me, Miss Bradford. I did not mean to take up your whole evening. I enjoyed it, Tessa said, and realized with a start that she meant it completely. She had not had such an easy, comfortable conversation with anyone since coming to Idaho. You are welcome to come by any time you need mending. Preston paid her for the work, his fingers brushing hers briefly as he handed over the coins, and Tessa felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. He put on his still damp coat and hat, then paused at the door. Miss Bradford, he said, would you perhaps like to see the cabin sometime? I know it is the subject of much gossip and you might be curious. I promise it looks better on the inside than the outside. Tessa felt her cheeks warm. I would like that very much, Mr. Keller. Preston, he said. Please call me Preston. Then you must call me Tessa. He smiled again, that transforming smile, and tipped his hat. Good night, Tessa, and thank you for the mending and the conversation both. After he left, Tessa found herself unable to focus on the wedding dress. She kept thinking about Preston's explanation of the cabin, about the intelligence and care that had gone into something everyone else dismissed as foolishness. She thought about his kind eyes and gentle manner, the way he had listened to her stories with genuine interest. The following Sunday, Preston came to town in his wagon and stopped by the shop. Tessa was just closing up, and her heart lifted when she saw him waiting outside. I was wondering if you would like to take that ride out to see the cabin, he said. The weather is clear, and it is a pretty drive. Tessa agreed immediately, locking up the shop and letting Preston help her up onto the wagon seat. They drove out of town as the afternoon sun painted the grasslands gold, and Preston pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the area. He had a quiet sense of humor that surprised her, and she found herself laughing more than she had in months. The cabin came into view as they crested a small rise, and Tessa could see immediately why it attracted such criticism. It did look odd from the outside, with its mismatched woods and irregular appearance. But as they drew closer, she could also see the solid construction, the careful joinery, the way everything fit together despite the unconventional appearance. It will not win any beauty contests, Preston said, a note of self-deprecation in his voice. It is interesting, Tessa said diplomatically, and he laughed. Inside, however, the cabin was a revelation. The space was warm and inviting, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and windows positioned to flood the room with light. The furniture was handmade but beautifully crafted, and everything had a place and purpose. Preston had built shelves and cabinets that fit perfectly into the irregular walls, creating a cozy, efficient space. "Preston, this is wonderful," Tessa said, turning slowly to take it all in. "It feels like a real home." He looked pleased and slightly embarrassed. "I tried to make it comfortable. I plan to add more once winter passes. Maybe a separate bedroom, a bigger kitchen area, but this will do for now." They spent the afternoon there with Preston showing her all the clever features he had incorporated. The windows that could be shuttered from inside, the thick curtains he had hung for extra insulation, the way the fireplace was designed to heat the whole space efficiently. He had even built a small root cellar beneath the cabin, accessed by a trapdoor to store food through the winter. "You have thought of everything," Tessa said admiringly. "I have tried," Preston replied. "Winter in these mountains can be harsh. I wanted to be ready." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Preston drove Tessa back to town. They talked the whole way, conversation flowing easily between them, and when he helped her down from the wagon in front of the shop, his hands lingered at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for coming out," he said. "It meant a lot to me to have someone see what I was trying to do." "Thank you for showing me," Tessa replied. "I think what you have built is remarkable, Preston. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." Their friendship grew from that day forward. Preston came to town every few days, always finding some reason to stop by the shop. Sometimes he needed actual mending, but often he just came to talk, to share coffee and conversation. Tessa found herself watching for him, her heart lifting whenever she saw his tall form coming down the sidewalk. The town noticed, of course. Clara Mills made pointed comments about propriety and young women who should be careful of their reputations, but Tessa found she did not care. For the first time since coming west, she felt truly happy, truly connected to someone. November turned to December, and the weather grew colder. Snow dusted the mountains and frost covered the ground each morning. The talk in town increasingly focused on the coming winter and whether Preston's cabin would survive it. "It is going to be a hard winter," Marcus Whitman predicted one afternoon in the shop. "My bones feel it. That Keller boy better have a backup plan for when that cabin of his falls apart." Tessa kept her opinions to herself, but she worried. What if everyone was right? What if Preston's confidence was misplaced? She had grown to care for him deeply, and the thought of him suffering or being proven wrong in front of the whole town troubled her. Preston seemed unconcerned. When she gently broached the subject one evening as they shared dinner at the boarding house, he just smiled. "I know people think I am foolish," he said, "but I trust what my father taught me. This cabin will hold, Tessa. I promise you that." "I believe you," she said, and realized she did. She had come to trust Preston's judgment, to see the intelligence and care behind everything he did. The first real snow came on December 15th. A steady fall that lasted 2 days and left a foot of white powder covering everything. The temperature dropped sharply, and people hurried to ensure their homes were properly sealed and their firewood supplies adequate. Preston came to town the day after the snow stopped, his wagon loaded with wood he had cut and stacked through the autumn. "I thought you might need this," he said to Tessa, unloading several armfuls by the back entrance to the shop. "The room you rent above the general store can get cold, and I wanted to make sure you had enough to keep warm." Tessa was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Preston, this is too much. I cannot accept all this without paying you." "It is a gift," he said firmly. "Please, Tessa, it would ease my mind to know you are warm." She accepted with gratitude and helped him carry the wood up the narrow stairs to the small stove in her room. When they finished, Preston looked around the cramped space with concern. "This is where you live?" he asked. "Tessa, there is barely room to turn around." "It is all I can afford," she said a little defensively, "and it is warm enough." "Barely," Preston muttered, noting the thin walls and single small window. He turned to her, his expression serious. "Tessa, if the winter gets bad, if you ever feel unsafe or too cold here, please promise me you will come out to the cabin. There is plenty of room and it will be warm." "I would not offer if I did not mean it." Tessa felt her cheeks flush. "Preston, I could not. People would talk." "Let them talk," he said intensely. "Your safety is more important than gossip, promise me." She looked into his earnest eyes and felt something shift in her chest, something warm and frightening and wonderful all at once. "I promise," she whispered. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Good," he said softly. Then, as if realizing what he was doing, he released her hand and stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should let you get back to work." After he left, Tessa sat on her narrow bed and pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race. She was falling in love with Preston Keller. Perhaps she had been falling for weeks now, but in that moment, with the promise hanging between them and the warmth of his hand still lingering on hers, she could no longer deny it. Christmas approached, and Lewiston prepared for the holiday with decorations and special church services. Tessa worked long hours filling orders for new dresses and shirts, everyone wanting to look their best for the celebrations. Preston came by on Christmas Eve with a package wrapped in brown paper. "For you," he said, looking shy. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have something." Tessa opened it with trembling fingers and found a beautiful wooden box about the size of a large book. The lid was carved with an intricate pattern of flowers and vines, and the inside was lined with soft fabric. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Preston," she breathed. "Did you make this?" He nodded. "For your sewing supplies. I noticed you keep everything in that old basket, and I thought you might like something nicer." "It is exquisite," Tessa said, running her fingers over the smooth wood and detailed carving. "Preston, I have never received such a thoughtful gift. Thank you." She retrieved her own gift for him, a new shirt she had made in secret, working on it late at night after finishing her other orders. She had used the best fabric in the shop, a deep blue that would bring out the color of his eyes, and had sewn it with tiny, perfect stitches. Preston unfolded the shirt with obvious delight. "Tessa, this is beautiful. You did not have to do this." "I wanted to," she said. "You are always wearing work clothes, and I thought you might like something nice for special occasions." He held the shirt up, examining the careful construction and perfect fit. "I will treasure it," he said. "Thank you, Tessa, truly." They spent Christmas Day together, attending church service in the morning and then having dinner at the boarding house with the other residents. It felt natural and right to be together, and Tessa could see the knowing looks from Clara Mills and the other women. But she found she did not care about the gossip anymore. Being with Preston made her happy, and that was all that mattered. The weather worsened after Christmas. A series of storms rolled through, each one bringing more snow and colder temperatures. By mid-January, Lewiston was buried under several feet of snow, and the cold was so intense that water froze solid in buckets overnight. People stayed inside as much as possible, venturing out only for necessities. Preston still came to town regularly, and Tessa marveled at his ability to make the journey in such conditions. He always looked healthy and energetic, his cheeks ruddy from the cold but his eyes bright. "How are you managing?" she asked one afternoon when he stopped by the shop. "Everyone else is complaining about the cold and running low on firewood." "The cabin is holding up perfectly," Preston said with quiet satisfaction. "It stays warm with just a moderate fire, and I stacked enough wood to last until spring. I am very comfortable." Tessa felt relieved and vindicated. Despite the harsh conditions, Preston's cabin was proving to be everything he had claimed, but the town gossips were not ready to concede yet. "He is putting on a brave face," James Henderson said loudly in the general store one morning, making sure Preston could hear from across the aisle. "But that cabin cannot be keeping him warm. It is probably drafty as a barn in there." Preston ignored him, paid for his supplies, and left without responding. But Tessa saw the tightness in his jaw, the way his shoulders stiffened. The constant mockery was wearing on him, even if he tried not to show it. "Why do you not invite people to come see how well the cabin is working?" Tessa suggested that evening when Preston came by to walk her home from the shop. He shook his head. "They would not come, or if they did, they would find something else to criticize. Some people need someone to look down on, Tessa. It makes them feel better about themselves. I decided a long time ago that I would not waste energy trying to change minds that are already made up." "It still is not fair," Tessa said. Preston stopped walking and turned to her, his expression tender. "You believe in me," he said. "You see what I built and understand it. That is worth more than the approval of the whole town." They stood in the cold street, snow falling softly around them, and Tessa felt the moment stretch between them like something physical and tangible. Preston reached up and gently brushed a snowflake from her cheek, his touch lingering. "Tessa," he said softly, "I need to tell you something. I have been trying to find the right moment, but I am beginning to think there is no perfect time, so I am just going to say it. I have fallen in love with you, completely and entirely. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. I know I do not have much to offer, just a cabin that everyone laughs at and a small plot of land, but if you could see your way to giving me a chance, I would spend every day of my life trying to make you happy." Tessa felt tears prick her eyes, joy flooding through her. "Oh, Preston," she whispered. "I love you too. I have for weeks now. I thought I was going mad falling for someone so quickly, but I could not help it." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Tessa rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart through his heavy coat. They stood like that for a long moment, oblivious to the cold and the snow and anyone who might be watching. "Marry me," Preston said into her hair. "I know it is fast, but I am certain, Tessa. I have never been more certain of anything in my life." "Yes," Tessa said, pulling back to look up at him. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Tessa felt like her heart might burst from happiness. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Preston took her hand. "We should go tell people," he said. "Make it official." News of their engagement spread through Lewiston faster than a prairie fire. The reactions were mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for them, but others, particularly those who had been most critical of Preston, seemed affronted by the development. "That poor girl is making a mistake," Clara Mills said to anyone who would listen. "Marrying a man with nothing but that ridiculous cabin. She will regret it come spring when she realizes what she has tied herself to." James Henderson was even more blunt. "Keller is a fool, and now he has convinced that seamstress girl to be a fool with him. They deserve each other." But Preston and Tessa ignored the criticism, wrapped up in their happiness and plans for the future. They decided to marry in February, wanting a small ceremony with just a few close friends. Preston began making improvements to the cabin to accommodate a wife, building new furniture and adding personal touches. Tessa gave notice at the shop, planning to start her own sewing business from home once they were married. She had already saved enough money to buy her own equipment, and several of her regular customers had promised to continue patronizing her even after the move. January crawled toward February, and the weather grew even more severe. The cold was relentless, and snow fell almost daily. People began to worry about food supplies and whether they had enough firewood to last until spring. The Henderson Ranch, usually so well prepared, was running low on hay for their livestock, and several other families were rationing their coal and wood. Through it all, Preston remained unconcerned. His cabin stayed warm. His supplies remained adequate, and he seemed genuinely comfortable despite the harsh conditions. Tessa visited the cabin several more times, always chaperoned by Clara Mills or another woman to preserve propriety, and each time she was impressed by how well Preston had planned for the winter. "I cannot wait to live here," she told him one Sunday afternoon as they sat by the fire, Clara dozing in a chair across the room. "It already feels like home." Preston smiled and squeezed her hand. "2 more weeks," he said. "Then you will be here permanently, and I will be the happiest man in Idaho." The wedding was planned for February 14th, Valentine's Day. It seemed fitting, a celebration of their love in the middle of the harsh winter. The ceremony would be held at the small church in town, with a reception afterward at the boarding house. But nature had other plans. On February 10th, the sky turned an ominous gray that made even the hardiest residents of Lewiston nervous. The air pressure changed, making ears pop, and animals grew restless. Old-timers who had lived in the area for decades looked at the sky and shook their heads grimly. "Big storm coming," Marcus Whitman said. "Maybe the biggest I have seen in 30 years. Everyone better make sure they are prepared." He was right. The storm hit on the evening of February 10th with a ferocity that took everyone by surprise. The wind screamed down from the mountains, driving snow so thick that visibility dropped to mere feet. The temperature plummeted to dangerous levels, and the wind chill made it deadly to be outside for more than a few minutes. Tessa was in her room above the general store when the storm hit. She had been preparing her wedding dress, adding final touches to the lace and hem, when the wind suddenly intensified and the windows began to rattle violently. She looked outside and could see nothing but swirling white. The storm raged through the night and into the next day, showing no signs of weakening. Tessa huddled by her small stove, wrapped in every blanket she owned and worried about Preston. Was he safe? Was the cabin holding? She tried to reassure herself that he would be fine, that he had prepared for exactly this situation. But the howling wind and shaking walls made it hard to believe anything could withstand such fury. By the second day, conditions in town had deteriorated badly. Many buildings were not designed for such extreme weather, and people struggled to stay warm. The general store below Tessa's room was doing its best to help, distributing extra supplies to those who needed them, but resources were limited. Tessa's small room was particularly vulnerable. The thin walls provided little insulation, and despite burning through most of her firewood, she could not get the space warm. Her fingers grew numb as she tried to work, and her breath fogged in the air. She wore every piece of clothing she owned, layering skirts and shawls, but still the cold seeped through. On the third day of the storm, as Tessa sat shivering by her dying fire, there was a pounding on her door. She struggled to open it against the wind and found Preston standing there, covered in snow and ice but looking strong and determined. "Preston," she cried, "you should not be out in this. It is too dangerous." "I came for you," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "This building is not safe, Tessa. The roof is sagging under the snow load and your room is freezing. You need to come with me to the cabin." "I cannot leave," Tessa protested, even as her teeth chattered. "The The storm is too severe. That is exactly why you need to come, Preston said firmly. He came inside and began gathering her belongings, moving with efficient purpose. I have a wagon with a covered back and plenty of blankets. We can make it safely, but we need to go now before conditions get worse. Tessa wanted to argue, but she was so cold and the room was so miserable that she found herself nodding. Preston wrapped her in a heavy coat and scarf, then bundled her belongings into bags. He led her down the stairs and out to where his wagon waited, the horses stamping nervously in the wind. The journey to the cabin was harrowing. The wind buffeted the wagon, and the snow was so thick that Preston had to navigate mostly by instinct and memory. Tessa huddled in the back, wrapped in blankets and holding on as the wagon lurched and swayed. She prayed constantly, terrified that they would lose their way or overturn. But Preston knew what he was doing. He drove steadily, guiding the horses with calm competence, and after what felt like hours but was probably less than one, they reached the cabin. Preston helped Tessa down and rushed her inside, then went back out to care for the horses, getting them into the small shelter he had built beside the cabin. When he came back in, stamping snow from his boots and closing the door firmly behind him, Tessa was standing by the fireplace, staring in amazement. The cabin was warm. Not just tolerably warm, but genuinely comfortable, the kind of warmth that seeped into your bones and made you want to sigh with relief. "Preston," she said, her voice full of wonder. "It is so warm in here," he smiled as he removed his coat and hat. "I told you the cabin would hold," he said. "Come, sit by the fire and get properly warm. I will make us some coffee." As Tessa thawed out, feeling returning painfully to her frozen fingers and toes, she looked around the cabin with new appreciation. Outside, the storm was still raging, the wind howling like a living thing, but inside it was peaceful and warm and safe. The walls that everyone had mocked were holding firm, not even a whisper of draft coming through. The mismatched windows were shuttered securely, and the odd roof was shedding snow exactly as Preston had designed it to. "Everyone was wrong about this place," Tessa said softly. "You built something amazing, Preston." He brought her coffee and sat beside her, his expression serious. "I built it with love," he said. "Every nail, every board, every decision I made was with the future in mind. I was building a home, Tessa. A place where a family could be safe and warm, where children could grow up protected. I was not building to impress anyone or to look good. I was building something that would last." Tessa felt tears sting her eyes. "I understand that now," she said, "and it is beautiful." They spent that evening together, properly chaperoned or not. The storm made it impossible for Preston to take Tessa back to town, and propriety had to give way to practicality. Preston gave her his bed while he slept on a pallet by the fire, ever the gentleman. The storm continued for 2 more days, and during that time, disaster struck in Lewiston. On the 4th day of the storm, the roof of the Henderson ranch house collapsed under the weight of the snow. The family managed to escape, but they lost everything, their home destroyed in an instant. Other buildings suffered similar damage, roofs caving in or walls buckling under the pressure of wind and snow. The general store, where Tessa had been living, lost half its roof on the 5th day. If she had still been in her room, she likely would have been injured or killed. When Preston and Tessa learned this news later, they held each other tight, both shaken by how close she had come to tragedy. As the storm finally began to weaken on the 6th day, Preston made the journey to town to check on people and offer help. What he found shocked him. Many families were displaced, their homes damaged or destroyed. People were cold, hungry, and frightened, not knowing what to do. Preston did not hesitate. He began organizing rescue efforts, using his wagon to transport people and supplies, helping to shore up damaged buildings, and offering his cabin as temporary shelter to those who needed it most. The Hendersons, so quick to mock him before, were among those who required help, their pride shattered along with their home. "We do not deserve your help," James Henderson said when Preston arrived at the makeshift shelter where the family was staying. "Not after the way we treated you." Preston shook his head. "That does not matter now," he said. "What matters is getting everyone through this safely. I have a wagon and strong horses and knowledge of how to build.